from Vassar College, this is Conversations at the Salt Line with Wesley Dixon. On this episode, a conversation with Elise Hogue.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Conversations at the Salt Line. Today, I am super honored to have an illustrious Vassar alum, Elise Hogue, class of 91, former president of NARAL, Pro-Choice America, here with us today. Thanks for being here, Elise.
Thank you for having me, Wesley.
I'm so wonderfully excited to talk to you. Now, I have to tell you, you are in a special group of people. Do you know what the group is?
Maybe.
You are it's a good group. You are the third guest on the podcast from the class of 91.
Really?
Yes.
Who else have you had?
Your classmate, Stacey London.
Oh, love her.
She's incredible.
Love her.
And Jason Blum.
Oh, fun.
Yes, it's a great, motley crew of 91ers on
Fashionable
the podcast.
horror.
Yes, exactly. I love that. Could be the name of the next podcast. It was really fun. And I say that I didn't recognize that until we were on the road for a campaign event, and someone in your class, whose name I can't remember right now, said to me, I love that you have so many 91ers on the podcast, and it wasn't intentional.
We were an amazing
guests.
class. Amazing class.
I'm not surprised to hear you say that, and I also believe it myself. The other thing is we have something in common, you and I. You're probably not going to guess it. I told you earlier that I'm a Floridian, and that is true, but I was born in Texas.
Oh,
So
really?
I'm a native Texan.
Where about?
I was born in San Antonio because I'm actually a preemie, 7.5 weeks. My mom was there for a business trip when I was born. So
Oh, wow.
I was born there, not unintentionally, but we lived in Plano for a couple of years. Before
Dramatic entrance into the world.
Very dramatic. And I'm a Cancer, so, it sort of aligns with
That does make sense. That makes
Careful,
sense. I'm
not
a
too
Virgo.
much.
I'm judging you right now.
You can judge me. That's okay. I have friends who are Virgos, and I, support equal opportunity.
Some of your best friends are Virgos.
It's true.
Is that what you're saying?
It's true. No, it is true. One of my best friends' birthday is September 6th. I love Virgos. We have some differences, but, I find out how to navigate them and their quirks and love them through those things.
Well, on behalf of Virgos everywhere, I thank you.
Thank you. I am curious, though, thinking about our current geopolitical climate, American political climate, if you want to call it that. We're both from states that I think people often criticize as states that might be, I don't want to call them backwards, but states that have, they're in the news a lot for sort of really, not just clickbait, but really controversial political legislative decisions. But I know, because I've heard you say it, that you're a proud fourth-generation Texan, and I'm a very, very proud Floridian. What is it sort of like for you, particularly operating in a very progressive space, but having pride for a state that many progressives might turn their nose up and say, oh my gosh, Texas? Why would you ever want to live there, be from there, or have pride for that place?
Mm-hmm.
What's it like sort of balancing those sorts of things in your life?
Such a good question. Yeah, it wasn't until I came to Vassar, I never left Texas much before I came to Vassar, that I realized that people have this enmity for Texas. And that was long before the Texas government started jumping the shark on regressive legislation. And it made me really think hard about what I appreciated about where I grew up. And the truth is, Texas is an unbelievably diverse place. And the government, much like many people said about the entire country under a specific president, was not and is not reflective of the people of Texas. And I think there's a particular metal that's forged in the face of adversity, a strength, but also a joyful resilience that I experienced, not just growing up in Texas, but especially now when I go back.
Right.
And it's hard to be progressive. It's hard to be a feminist. It's hard to be gay. It's hard, it's hard to be Jewish from Texas. Right. And there's a sense of understanding, priding your own identity from a very early age when you're different. Mm-hmm. In a place that doesn't embrace difference. But the other thing that I remind people, and I'm sure you can do the list from Florida, is out of that, emerging from that, are some of the most incredible leaders and people, and Barbara Jordan and Kinky Friedman and Ann Richards and just all of these, Janis Joplin, all of these amazing Texans who really took that fiery independent spirit and forged it for progress in their various fields: politics, music, culture, arts. And that's just a fantastic thing to have grown up around.
Yeah, I love those stories. And I, of course, am biased. We have similar sort of upbringing in this regard. But I love sort of giving airtime to the fact that even in these places that, whether because of media propaganda or other kinds of things, we have come to think of as sort of hotbeds of whatever negative noun you want to put on it, there is so much there that is worth leaning into, not giving up on, sort of not abandoning, which sometimes is sort of the rallying cry of progressives today, right? I mean, you think about the NAACP sort of, I forgot what they called it, but they're sort of travel advisory for Black folks in Florida, right? And there's reasons on both sides to why people might support it and deny that. But I think behind that for me is sort of an abandoning of those who are there doing the great work, trying to fight for progress in a variety of ways. And that may not be what ultimately is the best thing to do if we are, in the broad sense of the word, trying to support those efforts.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, the first time I heard progressives talking about wishfully articulating the idea that Texas would secede, I was like, wait, that's not progressive.
Right.
Like there's so many incredible people that are struggling for human rights and for basic fairness and justice, and we should be supporting them. We should not be wishing they would just disappear so they wouldn't offend our sensibilities of I couldn't agree more. There are scary things happening in your state and my state. I will not deny that. But to abandon it is to suggest that there are citizens in this country and non-citizens who don't deserve to be treated like humans. And that's just not a principle I'm ever going to hold.
Me neither. We have a lot to discuss in terms of your great work, of course, in the book you've written, The Lies That Bind. But I want to sort of start before that part of your life. We're here at Vassar. You're here at Vassar, particularly this weekend for Sophomore Career Connections, to serve as a great mentor to our upcoming rising students. And I want to sort of just get a window into what your time was like at Vassar, particularly because, as many of our listeners know, places of higher education are often the first sorts of gardens or beds of soil for future activists in their life. And they sort of get their activist chops while they're in college. What was that like for you? How did you sort of see Vassar playing a role in the career you've now built for yourself?
Oh, wow. I mean, I really, I knew when I was applying to college that I wanted to get out of Texas, but I couldn't have told you much more than that.
Right.
My sister, who's a year older than me, and I were the first in our family to leave Texas to go to school. She went to Duke. And I applied to Vassar. I think there was like one family friend who had gone here and spoke highly of it. We happened to have a college counselor who had come from the Northeast, so had connections to and suggestions about what kinds of colleges to apply to. And so I applied. And I got in and I visited. I really visited for a very short period of time. But there was just something about the place that made me go, that's fascinating. I really want to experience that for 4 years. And I would say I still did not know what I was getting into. And I arrived on campus and it was like through the looking glass. And I'll tell you, because we were talking about Stacey London, who was on the podcast before, who was in my class and is a friend. There was nothing more exotic to me arriving from Texas than people like Stacey who had come from New York and were just so self-assured and stylish. And, this was like almost like arriving in a foreign land where I didn't speak the language. But I delighted in all of it.
Right.
I delighted in all of it. And I think what Vassar provided for me, coming from a fairly homogeneous background, was, at least in terms of thinking, was just this social permission to explore academically, obviously, but also to explore who I was and who these other people were and what that meant about the world around me. And the sort of spirit of challenging the status quo and searching for how we created new and interesting and better spaces was just so liberating. I drank it all in. I drank it all in so much I got mono at the end of my first year. But it really it transformed my life. I don't think I would have done any of the things that I did if I hadn't come to Vassar.
That's incredible. Like many things, the names of things change, like NARAL. But I'm curious what student groups at the time you were part of.
Oh,
when you were on
yeah.
campus.
Did we start it? There was the Vassar Environmental Group, VEG. And that was really a main focus of mine. Early in my career, I was an environmental activist and was really passionate about just the outdoors and being in the outdoors. And so did a lot of work with the Vassar Environmental Group. I also worked as a campus tour guide and in the admissions office doing my senior year, doing admissions interviews. I loved Vassar so much, I wanted to actually contribute to it in that way. And other than that, I don't actually recall so much being a part of student groups as like being able to dip in and out of things and, go to the plays and the singing performances and, I played rugby.
Oh, wow, look at you.
I know, that's so
Part of
funny
an
to
elite
think about
group.
now. It was, that was a trip. But yeah, it was really, it was just a time of so much joy and so much experimentation in what Vassar provides, which is sort of a safe environment to be able to say, maybe I want to try that. Yeah, that fits, or no, it doesn't.
Right.
Without judgment.
Absolutely. And fast forwarding to now, we're living in a time that is not unique. I mean, it's divisive in lots of ways, and unfortunately, that's sort of the norm, if you will, in American culture and history. But we are in a particularly divisive time, and I think it's no surprise to anyone listening that higher education has found itself in the crosshairs of lots of national conversation, particularly around student activism on campus. And I'm just curious for your sort of hot take, if you will, on what you're seeing in the news, how it's being discussed, and if there's any sort of warning signs you want to raise for those who may not be as attentive about what the critiques of higher ed mean for where our country is going in the next few years.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not a fan of hot takes, so I'm going to give you a medium warm take, if that's okay. Campus activism is not only a longtime tradition in this country and others, but I think it's actually a necessary feature of higher education in order to, as I said previously, explore the ideas that actually create a better world. Generally a fan. Did my time protesting different things at Vassar, and really learned a lot from it. In fact, the big pro-choice March on Washington in '89, which I could give you the long history about, but I won't. We took buses down, and it was a really big deal. I did not come from a culture of protest to be amidst hundreds of thousands of people supported by my college to make a statement about something I cared very deeply about, which were threats to reproductive rights at the time, which feel quaint now, was hugely transformative in me understanding my own agency and power to make change in the world. I think where we risk, I guess, undercutting the value of such activity is when we lose our desire for engagement and curiosity with opposing viewpoints. What Vassar always did for me and has served me well is the idea of constructive engagement. Get out there, use your voice, state when you think things are wrong, and then actually listen and consider and ask questions and be curious about the other viewpoint. And I do think that sort of the idea that just ideology can sort of replace this kind of strategic curiosity is one that can pose danger to our own evolution as human beings, but also to democracy, because democracy actually requires taking into account other viewpoints and finding a pathway forward together. And so, I don't spend as much time on college campuses as you do, Wesley. So, I'm getting a lot of this third hand. But I do worry about that, and I worry about the chilling effect on actually on young brains. My niece is a senior at Wesleyan, so we talk about this a lot. When they're terrified to say something because of social excommunication or not being able to show up in the next party that they want to go to. That I think is scary. I will say I'm not a fan of hauling college presidents in front of Congress. I think that is performative and doesn't move us forward. And I also think one of the things we need to get a handle on, thank God I went to college before social media. One of the things that we have to get a handle on is part of exploration as a young person, even as an older person, is being able to screw up.
Make mistakes,
Being able to say things that you would look back on and be like, I cannot believe I ever uttered those words. And that should not define your entire future. And, I do believe that I have to believe, I don't know them personally, that was on the minds of those college presidents, is like some of the things that some of the students have said, I'm sure they abhor. Absolutely. I'm sure it was terrible. But like your job as a college president is also to protect the future of your students. And I support that.
Yeah. And to create space, like you said, for them to be able to make those sorts of mistakes or decisions they would have made differently in the future, and allow them to grow through that.
I mean, I teach my own kids that if they're not making mistakes, they're not pushing themselves hard enough. And so I really worry about how we maintain a culture where we support and encourage making mistakes and staying in constructive engagement with one another to find a pathway forward together.
Absolutely. We're going to revisit that in a little bit, because I think there's some insights, if you will, or connections to what you just said with sort of the political litmus test that we often see being used by many people, if you will, to sort of say you're in or you're out, or this, you're pro my side or not, in ways that don't actually allow for the messiness or the nuance that you just described on college campuses. So we'll get back to that in a second. So you're at Vassar, you're doing your thing, you're like taking the bus down to DC, you are just like a budding activist. And then 2013 comes and you start to lead this incredible pro-choice organization that is at that time and certainly now really critical for advocating for reproductive justice. We'll talk a lot about that. But first, I want to just get your top line sort of insights on what it's like to be part of the Washington sort of bubble, right? It's a whole different world than many folks can imagine if they've not been part of it. And it's filled with acronyms and 10,000 organizations. You don't know what any of them really do. They sound like the same thing over and over again. So what was it like for you to be in Washington leading an organization that was doing such incredible work?
It is both heady and a little terrifying.
Yeah.
I think I want to make sure all of your listeners and viewers and all the students at Vassar understand that everybody walks around with imposter syndrome, and that was never more acute for me than, when I was invited to the White House to sit in a room and discuss policy with the president and his advisors. So it's, it is a fascinating thing to understand how power works and doesn't work in this country. And I will say from the outset, I was an accidental traveler to Washington, D.C. God bless the people who know that that's what they want to do their entire lives. I actually accidentally ended up there. I was going to be an environmental activist for my whole life. I was going to ride Greenpeace boats. I was going to be in Indonesia and South America. And I did that for a really long time. And I ended up coming home to do organizing here and found myself coming as an outsider into DC, you know, in my mid 30s. So I'm glad that I had a little bit more of a global non-DC perspective when I came in. Look, it's fun. You know, one of the things I promised myself is that I would never get so jaded that a trip to the White House was like, ugh,
Whatever.
I have to go to the
do
White
this,
House,
right.
you know, and I never did. But I also promised myself that when I felt like I was no longer the right person or I no longer had anything original or unique to contribute to this position, that I would pass the baton to someone else, which I so gratefully did. And my successor at NARAL is a fantastic woman, Minnie Timaraju, also a Texan. It's hard. It is hard to do that. You get lured in. And so one of the mantras that I had while I was there was to remind myself that access is not the same as impact. Getting invited to the meetings is not the same thing as having a goal when you walk in and seeing progress towards that goal. But, you know, Washington is a really vibrant, amazing place where so many people who care so passionately about making the world a better place go to live. And I have really benefited from that. And having been there for 15 years and raising my kids there, I feel compelled to remind the listeners and the viewers that Washington is much bigger than the White House and the Capitol, that there is an incredibly rich culture of cuisine, art, music. So if you do come visit, make sure that you get more than a mile away from the White House and experience all that this fantastic city has to offer.
Absolutely. I love Washington. I love Ben's Chili Bowl.
Ah, the best.
It's so good.
At 3 a.m., even
Yes,
better.
Exactly. I used to do that. I don't do that anymore. But when I was younger, I would go on U Street and get it after I was out at the clubs a little bit. So you had this great time at NARAL, and while you were there, towards the end of your time, you authored this incredible book, The Lie That Binds. I said lies earlier. The truth is there are many lies, but you wrote about one big lie in your book, and I found the book to be such a helpful. Many things, sort of a helpful historical record, because I frankly didn't know history as deeply as you penned it in your book, and also sort of got some insights into ways we could think about moving forward in the face of regressive policies or sort of a climate that sort of just seemed like intractable, if you will. We're going to delve deep into some of the stories you share in the book, but I want to just get your reflection on the experience of writing the book, and you're writing it at a time where the rights you're talking about, reproductive rights, are front and center. So it's not sort of a retrospective fully. It's sort of like you're in it right now, trying to write and trying to address this issue. What was that like for you?
Hard.
Yeah.
I'll back up a little bit and say I didn't come out of the reproductive rights and justice movement. I came to it, and I came to it after several years in D.C., really trying to understand how this issue of abortion was used as a cudgel that could freeze the entire Congress in its tracks. You know, I did it on the healthcare bill. I was watching anti-abortion, what are called riders, amendments being attached to totally random things. And I was like, how is this thing, which is at the end of the day a medical procedure, that affects relatively, I mean, if you need an abortion, you can't get one. It is the biggest thing in the world too, but statistically affects a relatively small number of people compared to like the need for healthcare or something like that. How is it grinding everything to a halt? So I was fascinated by that question. I had a lot of organizational experience, organizing and campaigning experience. But that was sort of why I chose to go to NARAL and do a deep dive. And I was compelled to write the book because my experience clarified so much for me, which is, the issue of abortion was actually contrived as a Trojan horse to move what we now largely acknowledge culturally was an agenda that was about control, that was about patriarchal, heteronormative control, that really only served or was supported by a minority of people, but they needed an issue that was going to allow them to impose this on a majority. And ultimately, it's an anti-democratic agenda.
Yeah.
And so writing the book itself was something, we were going to write a report, actually. We were like, we have all this data, we're going to write a report. And then, like you said, we realized, there's too much context required. People don't know the history. People don't know that the radical right that ultimately took over the Republican Party didn't start off fighting abortion at all. They didn't care about abortion. They started off fighting school desegregation. They didn't want their kids to have to go to school with black kids after the civil rights movement. And so, we felt like in order to understand the role of white fundamentalist patriarchy, we had to give the history. So anyway, long story short, we were getting a little desperate. We were like, we can't put out a report. We have to write a book. I will just say for context, this was during the Trump years. It was a fire drill every single day. Right. I really owe my husband a shout out for this because we had small children at home. I would get up. I was still running the organization. So I would get up every morning at 5. I would start writing at 6. I would write until noon, and then I would run the organization for the rest of the day. And we really wanted to get it out. The goal of the book originally was to influence Democrats' posture on abortion. They needed to stop shrinking from the issue and really own it. And the media and the way the media covered the issue, because it was always covered as this sort of distasteful niche issue rather than the central organizing theory of a pretty dangerous opposition. Right. And so it had to be out in 2020 in order to have the possibility of achieving those goals. So, we were rushing it. I owe my research director and co-author Ellie Langford a huge debt of gratitude. Then, of course, the pandemic shut everything down. So our plans for release and being able to be on the Hill and make it a thing and do the book tour were immediately shut down. So it was a very chaotic time. I'm really proud of the book. There's also a podcast by the same name, which I encourage you to listen to. But, it was also... and I'll just leave it at this. You read it, so you can see in the final chapter, we tried to offer some solutions for a pathway forward, and those are sincere, and some of them have been undertaken. Now we see it. 8 out of 8 ballot measures on abortion have passed in states as red as Kentucky and Ohio at this point. So a lot of what we were writing about has been sort of culturally internalized at this point. But it's a dark book.
Yeah.
It is a hard read.
Yeah.
It was a hard thing to write. It was hard to sit there for hours and read the testimony of people who were caging children at the border while they were actually literally traveling around trying to prevent undocumented women who were raped on their travels up through Central America from terminating that pregnancy. And it was the kind of thing where it's important for people to be able to look at that and know that we do have strategies to move beyond that. We are the minority, and that is our superpower.
I love that. That was such an incredible
sorry, I said the minority. We are the majority.
No, I knew what you meant.
I know, but that's such a...
Yes, yeah. It's an important part of the story. I'm happy you corrected it. But that reflection is so helpful. And I took so much from that and from reading the book. I mean, the history is so dense. I think you're right. I did find it very dark. I for better or for worse, didn't find it surprising, but I found it very dark. My hope is that people can engage with that dark history and, to your point, not shrink because of it, but rather sort of say, wow, this is very motivating, and I should really do something to sort of brighten up the history or the future, if you will.
What was the most surprising thing to you that you didn't know?
Yeah, it's a good question you're asking. Actually, I don't know if this is the most surprising, but it's sticking with me when you said it. I did not have well, actually, there's two things that come to mind. I did not have any sense of who Kellyanne Conway was before, October of 2016 or whatever. And so having explained to me sort of that she did not just appear on Trump's campaign, and that her purpose there was one that she had been seeding for herself since she graduated from law school, basically, was a very interesting trajectory to read about. And I think what resonated with me about that, not sort of in a necessarily positive way, but what I could understand is, I don't want to say her capitulation, but the way in which I think she was very aware that, as you authored it, as you sort of argued it, she was not pro-woman, really, right? And she was sort of trying to say she's pro-woman, but not pro-choice, right? In a way that I think if I were her, I could imagine she felt very personally duplicitous about, right? But it was strategic for her to sort of occupy this space, right? The second thing that was just a piece of new information that I did not know was the founding of the Federalist Society.
At your alma mater.
Yes, at Yale Law School in whatever it was, 80-something. And it was both because of the content of the Federalist Society sort of sobering to sort of watch their very easy growth, if you will. But also I think it did speak in a sort of apolitical way to the value, to your earlier point about, on-campus higher education sort of activism being a real place for, sowing seeds for something that can become something beyond higher education, right? And of course, now the Federalist Society has played a large role in the shaping of our Supreme Court, many other things. And so, again, content aside, impact aside, I think as a broad lesson, that was a helpful reminder that higher education is not and doesn't have to be sort of removed from the larger world in which it exists, right? And I think for those who often say higher education or places of elite higher education are out of touch or not practical or don't sort of prepare people for real life, this is an example of sort of that not happening or turning that sort of comment on its head, right? And so the story was new for me and was sobering, but I sort of, maybe it's a Pollyanna in me, I found sort of a positive way to reflect on that history.
Absolutely. And investing in the vision of young people, I mean, has actually transformed the world.
Absolutely.
But to your point about Kellyanne, because it maps onto something earlier, one of the themes through the book is just how transactional a lot of the characters are, right? President Trump was not particularly anti-choice until it suited him politically to be anti-choice. And Phyllis Schlafly wanted to be a foreign policy hawk, but she found her place in gaining power by being an anti-ERA crusader. And to some degree, that is a subject of great critique, because if you have no moral center and you trade all of that away, you do a tremendous amount of damage to the world. On the other hand, part of their effectiveness is they're willing to negotiate with themselves and with each other. And so, like you said, it's like two sides of the same coin. There's a lot to learn there.
Absolutely. It's so funny. So for those who are listening and did not read the book, I'm going to try to a caveat. One of my favorite pieces of content shows, I think it's been canceled now, or it's been discontinued, I should say, was on Comedy Central. It's called Drunk History. I don't know if you...
I love Drunk History. So fun. Are we going to get drunk?
Well, not here, not right now, but maybe afterwards we can. I am a mixologist. Before I keep going, what's your favorite episode of Drunk History, actually?
Oh, that's such a good question. And now I'm drawing a blank. I just love all of them. I love all of them.
I can tell you mine. Yeah. My favorite by far is Harriet Tubman freeing the slaves.
Yes. That was a great one. That was a great one.
Funniest episode. So if you haven't listened to it or seen it, for those listening, you should definitely go listen to it. But I wanted to give my non-drunk, drunk history version of the whole book. I'm going to try to do it quickly and efficiently.
Okay,
But I want to
please
try
do.
to map out
Yes,
like the
please
trajectory
do.
from what I took, right? Okay, so the story starts in the 50s, right, at Brown v. Board, as you said. And, you know, the folks who were told they didn't integrate their schools were very upset about that. They didn't like it. Not everyone, but some Southern white people in particular did not like that. They're very upset. Okay, fine. They wanted to find a way around this, and they did by creating these things called segregation academies, which were sort of loopholes that made private, non-public schools that were sort of exempt from this need to integrate. Okay, cool. So they did that for some time. It was super cool. The government was like, hold on, you really can't do that. That's not sort of the intent of our new law. You gotta fix that, right? And so, or not, we gotta de-incentivize you from doing that. Okay, so President Carter ultimately sort of worked through the IRS to take away the tax exempt status of those folks who had skirted this integration mandate in that way. So this radical or new right group, this Southern strategy group, was sort of like, gosh, they got us. We got to find some other way to sort of be able to do what we want because we're losing the popular opinion about the need or the resistance to integration, right? So they had to find a way to do it. So some unnamed aide or unnamed somebody on a call said, what about abortion, right? Which at the time was a non-issue, really, right? It was sort of accepted that abortion was perfectly fine. People should do what they want to do with their bodies. There was no issue with that. And someone said, great, we got to make this the issue. Okay, fine. So they make it the issue. But it's really not an issue because they say it's an issue. They have to sort of sow the seeds for a long time to make it an issue. To help sow those seeds, there's someone named John Wilkie. John Wilkie says, okay, I got to help you make this an issue. I got to lie to do it. So I got to write this book that says all these things about abortion that make it seem like more than what it is. They make you feel horrible about it. You feel super immoral by supporting abortion because you're killing X, Y, and Z, expensive X, Y, and Z. Like, we gotta, here, take this and run with it. Go put it in every neighborhood. Tell folks they got to not like abortion, right? Okay. Even though that was his attempt, it didn't really work, right? Like, people still were not, in the majority sense, anti-abortion, right? Enter Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan is like, I got this. I need to have this voting bloc on my side. I'm getting pressure from Jerry Falwell, rest in peace to Daddy. And, we gotta get Jerry Falwell's people to be on my side. So he sort of aligns with them kind of by force because he needs their votes. And over the course of the Reagan years and then the first Bush years, there is this concerted effort to sort of start to talk about abortion in a way that had not been talked about before, but in a way that made it seem much more negative than had previously been seen. Okay, fine. So they make some headway. There are sort of these activist groups that are sort of starting to chip away at the rock that had been support for abortion. Clinton's in office. He doesn't sort of do anything, of course, to get rid of the right to abortion, but at the same time, his presidency starts to sort of not anger, but starts to sort of it witnesses people in the country who are sort of underground for a period of time start to become above ground. And there's all this violence and this negative reaction to those who are supporting abortion. There's unfortunate deaths in the 90s because the rhetoric of the previously fringe group has now become more mainstream. And people are starting to have that rhetoric influence their actions. And they're going after doctors who do abortion procedures and those who support it publicly. And it's a really dark time in the country's history. The 2000s happen. For some reason, I don't have a good sense of the baby Bush's years in my mind as far as the story goes. But we'll jump from him and go to Obama, who of course is incredibly pro-choice, pro-healthcare, obviously, but has a hard time at first, right? Because the House and the Senate are sort of changing hands in some ways, and it becomes hard for him to sort of make this negotiation to sort of allow the ACA to pass relative to the way that abortion was included or not in that piece of legislation. Okay, fine. So, mind you, at this time, there's constant attacks at abortion in a judicial sense, right? Mm-hmm. And what I haven't said as part of the story is, of course, the Federalist Society started back in the 80s, but at this time, they're training tons of future judges in making a pipeline for a much more conservative court, because that's part of the strategy of Falwell and Friends, is to make sure the court actually can cement what they want to do, because public opinion isn't really aligning with what they want to be the case, right? Okay, fine. So so, Obama does things, abortion's protected at that time, fine. Okay, but enter Trump, right? And what I haven't said is there's, of course, this consistent sort of low burn of people, as you said, who are trying to protect sort of a white nationalist, sort of dominionist, as the word you use in the book, sort of way of life, and they're not feeling heard, but they're really angry. They're getting upset over time, right? On internet chat groups, in text threads, WhatsApp groups, whatever. And so enter Trump, right? And he doesn't just enter, but you get my point. He sort of comes into power.
Comes down a golden escalator.
Yes, exactly. Who, to your point, doesn't really care about abortion really either, but again, really wants to have Falwell and friends on his side and sort of understands like, okay, this is the group that I need to sort of get me elected. They're sort of dangling this in front of me. This is their votes, but I have to then sort of align with their desires. And one of the desires is to sort of take the right of abortion away. And so Trump, of course, doesn't do that alone, but he does, I think, really strategically craft the court with help from others, Mitch McConnell and others, in ways that sort of make it easy to imagine that the federal protection of abortion that we know as Roe v. Wade could be taken down, which of course happened in 2022 with the Dobbs decision. And here we are today.
Wow,
Was that accurate?
That was the most succinct, linear synopsis of the book. I don't think I could do it that well. But let me add one thing, because
Please
I think
do.
it's really important, and I think it sort of speaks to where we are today. One of the things that Ronald Reagan, who, by the way, as governor of California, had liberalized abortion laws, right? And Trump, who we have a picture holding a fundraiser for NARAL in his apartment in the
goodness.
90s, shared in common was not just that they flipped on abortion for political expediency, but that it was easy for them to do so because neither of them had a particularly fond view of women. And I don't mean that, Ronald Reagan didn't love his wife.
Okay,
That
yep.
was like a very, very classic love story. But I mean, misogyny for them was in their blood.
Yep.
And it was part of their identity. And so when it came to this negotiation, it was a very easy thing for them to trade away. And the reason I make that point is because one of the things that the research has shown from the 70s and today is the thing that is most predictive of anti-abortion sentiment is not religiosity, which people would have you believe, but it's actually hostile sexism. And so when Trump came to power, it was this, we talk about the three legs of the stool that gave his sort of unlikely candidacy the power that it had, was the old school sort of dominionist radical evangelicals that had the ground troops. But then there was, the online white supremacist, David Duke, came out and was like, our guy, and then what's called men's rights activists who had sort of come out of the 70s, hated no-fault divorce, but really found their sort of zeitgeist online. I don't know how many of your listeners will remember Gamergate, but the sort of fighting originally female-designed games with female protagonists in the video world, but just really felt like feminism had robbed them of a way of life. And that persists today.
Absolutely.
And they are a huge part of what's powering Trump's second run for president. And interestingly enough, there's a lot of them who really like RFK Jr. as a third-party candidate. I do a lot of tracking of what we call user journeys online. And there's a pretty straight line from like wellness videos, self-help videos, to RFK Jr., to kind of the Proud Boys and Andrew Tate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he's kind of a way station right now.
It's so interesting.
Which is really interesting.
Wow. One of the things that I really enjoyed about the book, beyond just sort of learning the facts and sort of the narrative of the history, was sort of trying to identify a couple things, some lessons, because of course abortion is an issue you talk about, or the issue you talked about in the book, but as you say, vis-a-vis the term Trojan horse is one of many issues, right? And it's not the central issue. It's actually sort of just a means by which to sort of protect a larger set of power in the country. I love learning the lessons and in the insights, but also I was super interested to hear about what we call in the podcast the salt line, sort of these convergence of things that might be contradictory or might be sort of paradoxes that from which things emerge, right, or questions sort of emerge that I think are important to consider, right. So I sort of had a couple that I thought about as I read the book that we can consider in a current context, right. So the first, of course, is the salt line between language and democracy, right, and like we said, and language maybe is literature too, but there's this. The way things are framed, sort of the way movements get power based on the control of narrative and language is not insignificant, right? And I've read you sort of say that some of the success that we, quote unquote, saw in 2022 with many states sort of ultimately not passing abortion bans was because the left started to understand the importance of language in ways they had not used before, right? So, there's billboards that sort of use biblical scripture as ways to sort of promote life or promote choice in ways that had not been done before, right? And that was an effective strategy to be able to claim some sorts of democracy, if you want to argue it that way, right? Talk to me about the role of language democracy and the risk and the benefits of thinking about those two things together.
Yeah, I would say the right, to your point, you talked about John Wilkie, always understood the power of language, right? And you saw that from 2012 to 2020 with the introduction in the states of what they called, and if you're listening, I'm using scare quotes, heartbeat bills. And once you name something a heartbeat bill, like a heartbeat is a sacred thing, right? Like you're emotionally attached to this thing. And it didn't matter how many doctors would sit there and explain that's not a heartbeat. That's the cardiac activity between two because nobody wants to hear that. Right. And so I think there was a lot of disingenuous use of language. That Wilkie talks about it in his book, that one of the crucial elements of success for them was to move the sympathy from the pregnant woman to the potential of life that was within her, because naturally people's sympathy was with the pregnant woman. And they used a lot of language to do that. I think what was and is different about the effort of, I wouldn't even call it the left, because one of the things we now know is that this was never a left-right issue when it was taken head on. And we talk to people in language they can understand. This is a very mainstream issue where we have these ballot measures in states protecting abortion, passing, by double digits. Right. There's really no question anymore that Americans of all stripes support legal access to abortion. However, medical procedures are less important to them than the values that are intrinsic. And one of the things that the book tries to make the point of is this was never a battle about a medical procedure. Right. The medical procedure was a useful tool and a battle between freedom and control.
Right.
And when we use the language of freedom and control, not only do we win, but it's actually intuitive to people. We found this in focus groups, and you kind of said this on your read of the book. It's like, a whole bunch of stuff that was happening around me all of a sudden really makes sense, right? That this is really about who controls you and your life and your body and the most intimate things that happen to you. And we win on that front. Freedom is really an uncontested value on the left. I think that there is a lot of challenges in terms of then how you talk about other pieces of the puzzle. And that's not just true on abortion. I find it to actually be true across the board. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a both and. One of the things that I talk about a lot is language is really important in defining self, and nobody should get to define you besides you. And then language is really important in defining your own community and your own group, right? Whatever your Black, you're gay, you're Jewish, you're a trans person. You get to define who you are.
Right.
And the language that defines you should not be imposed upon you. I think the challenge then becomes when we are talking to people who are unfamiliar
Correct.
or concerned, are we actually going to engage in a conversation where they recognize language and terminology and values
was gonna say values in
specifically
particular is
that
what
they
you wanna
can
get
connect
to.
with you
Right.
on? Or are we going to reject them because they're rejecting the language that we have used to define ourselves? And I'm not here to say anyone is right or wrong. What I am here to say is indisputably progress comes from a both and.
Correct.
And I think we're losing some of the both and.
Both and part. Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy you're saying this. One of the things that I sort of picked up on as another potential sort of salt line or interesting thing in your book was this convergence of activism. Maybe I'll add sort of in parentheses before the effective activism and values, right? Because I think what we said before, part and parcel of Kellyanne Conway, for example, is there was a negotiation of potential personal or sort of societal values and a sort of abdication of some of them, maybe, in the name of effectiveness politically, right? And I think reading the book, one could reasonably conclude that the radical right was really effective in not letting maybe their values or sense of being principled get in the way of them getting what they wanted, right? And one could conversely say that at the time, at least, the left, quote unquote, maybe struggled with that, right? And their values sometimes maybe got in the way of them choosing to be activists in a way that would help them be successful. You may not buy that framing. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about my interpretation of that argument.
Yeah, I want to be careful to say that this happens on the right and the left. And when you did the synopsis of the book, you beautifully paid respect to the people who have died in the course of this war on abortion. And that was really a phenomena of the transactional right losing control of the far right. And you can only tell people abortion is murder so many times and then see incremental gains towards ending it before you're going to get a faction that thinks that's not sufficient. Yeah. And the right was in the wilderness for quite a long time because it turns out most people don't like political violence. It's scary to them. And so it does happen on both sides. I think that there is sometimes a larger challenge on the progressive left, the coalition between liberals, lefties, progressives, and Democrats, partly baked in because we are a much more diverse crew of people with a lot of passion, a lot of interest that inherently, when that gets funneled through a sort of plotting incremental legislative system, gets played off of each other, right? And so intrinsically, that is a challenge. And it's a challenge that I think Democratic leadership, it's confounded them at different points, and it's also scared them. I think that I worry that we're not actually quite where I would like us to be in learning those lessons, which is not about abdicating or trading away rights, which is just antithetical to the fundamentals of progressivism, but actually acknowledging and embracing the incrementalism that is baked into democracy, because when everything is not enough, as I've seen sort of emerge out of the Obama years and exacerbated through the Trump years, the message we're sending to people is democracy doesn't work. Yeah. It's not worth your time.
Engage, right.
And coming full circle on the book, the authoritarian right actually relies on disengagement because they are the minority. So when the majority doesn't participate, they win. And so I think it is incumbent on us, with all of our competing issues and challenges and fears and desires, to create a discipline and almost a poetry around the way that democracy flows, and to celebrate each other's victories as a win for everyone, even small and sometimes large. And
then maybe just to add, and then maybe to also see tragedy as part of that poetry, right?
oh, I love that. Say more.
Because I think part and parcel of the incrementalism is you step 3 steps forward, you step a step back, right? And so there's going to be, I'm saying tragedies, but some losses as part of that story, right? And if the losses, if you sort of punctuate the story at the loss, right, you don't get to see the other sort of gains and jumps, if you will, right?
Absolutely.
And so incorporating that as part of what you expect is not to sort of say that you're giving your activism up to like not being worth winning or not being worth fighting hard for, but it's to understand that there are losses as part of that, right?
I think that's right. And to mourn them, especially when they relate to real people. Right. I mean, that is tragic. And the community ritual of mourning is actually super important to building strength and resilience to continue the fight. But this is the human condition. I tell people the journey for democracy and for justice and all of the things that it encompasses, human rights, is just that, it's journey. We're never going to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that struck me, and we spoke about it a little bit before off camera, when I read the book, which I buy, abortion is sort of categorized in the word you use as a Trojan horse, right? It's sort of this secret weapon that really is not what we think it is, but it's used to sort of get other kinds of political and social gains, right? The other way that I thought about it potentially was sort of as a canary in the coal mine, if you will, in terms of this growing sort of movement of radical sort of new right contingents that might have been a minority at the time, but have outsized influence on our society. At the same time, because you frame abortion as sort of an issue that really wasn't the focus, it was sort of put out there to sort of get your attention on that, but other things were happening. It harkened in my mind back to a quote from Toni Morrison that sort of described the function of racism as one of being pure distraction, because it keeps you from doing your own work and keeps you explaining something that doesn't need explaining. And so it's funny because if you compare those two things, right, we're sort of saying like, we know this is the problem, i.e. racism, but it's meant to have you focus there as opposed to doing what you otherwise need to do. And I'm curious how you think about abortion in the same sort of framework, if you buy that framework, right? Because of course, I wouldn't imagine you would say we don't focus on reproductive rights because we think they're important, right? But there is another side game going on that I'm going to say is not more important, but is broader than just abortion, right?
Well, I'm never going to argue with
You
Toni
can.
Morrison. I'm never going to argue with Toni
She
Morrison.
probably wants you to.
She probably does want me to. I'm not ready for that. I mean, I think the greater point is a really important one. And, I think that one of the reasons we lost so much under the sort of framework of reproductive rights and health and is because we got too narrow, right? And saving abortion as a procedure, again, crucially important. People die when they don't have access to abortion. The New Yorker just did a big piece on the death of a woman in Texas post-Dobbs. People die. It's important. Nothing wrong with it. Should be a healthcare procedure you get to choose like others. And at the same time, we were not telling a story of what it meant beyond the moment that you're choosing and having an abortion. And for a lot of people, it's like they might never have one. They were also being told at the same time, it's none of your business. Right. So like, why am I going to engage in the conversation where you're telling me it's none of my business? And, I think a lot of folks talk about how feminism collapsed into a fight for abortion when it was obviously
Right.
about something so much bigger than that. And I believe that the rise of the reproductive justice movement was a really important inflection point in the fight for abortion because it did start to say abortion is about more
Right.
than abortion. It's about structural racism and it's about access to a whole bunch of health care
Misogyny broadly.
that historically, particularly not exclusively Black women, have not had access to because of structural racism writ large. And I really credit the reproductive justice movement with expanding the aperture
Amazing.
of the conversation about abortion, and the policy outcomes have been so much better as a result. And the conversation has been so much better. But ultimately, we're talking about a human struggle. We're talking about a human struggle for agency, for self-determination, versus one of control and domination. And that is a universal story. Affects people of all gender, all ethnicities, all races, all religions. And I think when we can bring it back to that, we are more persuasive.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to pivot in the final moments of our conversation to think about where we are now as a country and what the next couple of years might look like for us, right? Of course, we're just entering an election year. Stakes are and seem very high for our democracy. It's often talked about, as the struggle between democracy and authoritarianism, and this is our last shot, if you will. Some will argue to sort of get it right. And I want to think about the moment now with the help of your book and the work that you've done, right? If we think back to the early days post Brown v. Board, there was sort of a pivot in strategy, and there was a pivot in the issue focused on from racial integration to abortion. Given what you said earlier about sort of public opinion still being largely in favor of freedom of choice, state legislators in many ways sort of demonstrating that even in red states, some of the times the public still will vote in favor of abortion rights. One might assume that the clock is sort of running down on abortion being the issue of this side, right? And so for those who are listening and those who are voting and want to sort of have a more open eye to sort of the shell games that could be happening around them, what do you anticipate might be the issue that takes place of abortion in this broader fight for democracy?
So you're right. You're correct, I should say, that the right has played their hand on abortion, and a lot of leaders know it. I mean, Trump has already said he thinks federal abortion ban is a bad idea. They're going to, so I'll say this first. I think if the Democrats stay on offense on it, it really knocks them on their heels because they're still caught between a base who was promised ultimately a country free of abortion, which is a deeply unpopular position, and leadership who understands like they should not be talking about this anymore. It does not play well for them. So my first bit of advice is keep on them about it in the values language that we've all been talking about. I mean, again, it's dark. They really prefer to drill on issues that pit Democratic constituencies against each other. So immigration, really big one. What my friends in the LGBTQ movement call queer scapegoating, but particularly using trans kids as a wedge, which I find just to be so disgusting. But we see it in your state and mine.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
And I think with the war in the Middle East, it's going to be a lot of pitting Jewish people and Black people and people of color against each other. And I worry about it a lot. And, I said, I cautioned a group of donors last year, long before October 7th, that they could be facing a future where anti-Semitism became the new abortion because the right knows that it can unify them, it can divide the left, and most people are like, why are we talking about this? And I worry that some of that playbook is being rewritten, particularly with the hearings in Congress. And, I do a lot of work with friends to say we've got to be peace builders, not just to win the election, which is crucially important, but to make sure that we are able to make progress towards the vision of a multiracial, pluralistic democracy, because that's not what the right wants. And every issue they use to divide us takes us not one, but two steps backwards on that vision.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And what I was going to add, which you sort of said implicitly, but sort of the tagline of an additional issue that might take the place of abortion is DEI broadly, right? Because, of course, for the reasons you just articulated, right? I think people who are sinister on the right, quote unquote, see it as an opportunity, particularly post October 7th, to sort of wedge Jewish communities and Black or communities of color broadly, right? And
I totally agree.
All over.
And by the way, crime, just a proxy,
of course,
for that. So, again, we have to really see through their language, build a language of compassion and universal humanity, and hold that vision and invite people into it.
Thank you. You've done an incredible job doing that, both in our conversation, I can tell, but also I imagine in your work at NARAL in the past. Thank you for that. I want to finish off with some quick hot seat questions, which I think you might find interesting from our very thoughtful students, of which you were one time one of them. So the first question is, where in the country do you see some of the best grassroots organizing happening that may not be recognized?
Oh, fantastic. Idaho. Idaho is a state nobody pays much attention to.
Unless they're skiing in Sun Valley.
And they beat back a really terrifying gubernatorial candidate in the Republican primary in 2022. And they did it by building this amazing broad-based coalition across the state. So I think that that's really interesting. And then in Montana, anywhere you have the community coming out to create a ring around drag queen brunches. That is a part of activism that I want to be. This joyful resilience that draws attention to the insane hypocrisy of beautiful people reading stories to children. That is happening. That's happening in Tennessee. So look around. It's happening all around you.
I love that. Second question is, and you might have already answered it, but I'll just ask the question. Besides reproductive rights, what issue is most important to you and closest to your heart?
Democracy. Democracy, and teaching generations of kids who have never seen democracy work the way it's supposed to because the right has been hell-bent on breaking it, how beautiful it is. I mean, democracy like voting for a congressperson. I mean, democracy like civic participation and knowing your community and like stepping up to lead when you have an opportunity and supporting other leaders when you do. Living, breathing democracy.
So beautiful. Last question. What excites you about the world your children are growing up in? I think we often ask that in a fear-based way, right? Like, oh my goodness, I can't imagine.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah.
What excites you about it?
We didn't talk about AI. There's a whole podcast to do on AI, and so much of it is terrifying, and so many people are stoking the terror of it. But raising digital natives, I will say the expansion of possibility in their own minds about what they can achieve, because there is such a short distance to travel between their imagination and what it looks like, has been really, really exciting for me.
That's so exciting. It's so positive. AI is always, as you said, talked about in such scary terms.
And there are scary things about it. Don't get me wrong.
Obviously, right? Yeah. But I think having an optimistic framework about it, I think will yield optimistic and positive things. Thank you for that. Elise, it's been so fun talking to you. And despite having discussed some really thorny and difficult and dark things, I, for one, am willing to sort of write with you a poem that is filled with both tragedies, but mostly with victories. So thank you for joining me on that journey.
I have loved every minute. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And thank you all for listening to another episode of Conversations at the Salt Line. Talk to you soon.